Good evening and welcome to St. Andrew Lutheran Church as we gather here, either in person or online, to have representatives from the Center for Leadership and Neighborhood Engagement here to talk about the Intercultural Development Inventory, a process that St. Andrew has engaged in this fall. Starting off with a presentation by Pastor Deanna Bassett about a month ago or so with Pastor Gail and me here in the sanctuary that helped us understand more about why culture, what is culture, and how we move back and forth between cultures. Pastor Deanna is here with us this evening and will share with us part of our congregational results here today. We also welcome two other members of the team. I'll introduce one of them here who will share greetings and an introduction with you. This is Pastor Kelly Chapman is here with us. He is the Executive Director of the Center for Leadership and Neighborhood Engagement. He is the former pastor of Redeemer Lutheran Church and the Center for Life in North Minneapolis for over 20 years. A very dynamic presence in North Minneapolis doing vital ministry, cross-cultural ministry, perhaps, as a Lutheran pastor. So Pastor Kelly, and on behalf of St. Andrew and to the rest of the team, welcome to St. Andrew. Please help us understand more about the IDI and how it will help shape our personal lives as well as congregational ministry heading into 2021. So Pastor Kelly and Pastor Deanna, welcome to St. Andrew.
Thank you. One of the things that I want to say is that the first time I met Pastor Kelly in person was right here in front of this altar. And if I can embellish the story a little bit, I saved Pastor Kelly from choking during his preaching. So it's great to be back here. I've been a St. Andrew member for 15 years, and a year ago graduated from Luther Seminary with my MDiv after a lot of support from a ministry and financial perspective from St. Andrew. So thank you for all of that. And and then just recently, I received a first call from Christ the River of Life Lutheran Church. And while I was in that period of waiting between the time when I graduated and when I started at Christ the River of Life, I worked with Pastor Kelly at the Center for Leadership and Neighborhood Engagement. So I've gotten to know him much more through that. And would you like to introduce yourself a little bit more?
Yeah. Well, good evening. It's an honor to be here with you this day. Actually, I was introduced to Deanna Kim, and St. Andrews, we were at a church anew conference, and I was honored to be one of the speakers at that event. And we're honored to be with you again here this evening. This is the Individual Development Inventory is a wonderful gift as we look at how to impact our communities, our congregations, and engage in our leadership in the world. And so I'm so excited about that. Normally, this process takes 3 or 4 hours, and we're going to get it done in an hour. We make a commitment to that. And also just to remember that what we learn here, one of the values is confidentiality, that the individual input that you have, we hold that in confidence as we share this experience, and excited again to be partnering with you. The Center for Leadership and Neighborhood Engagement, we go by CLNE because it's a mouthful, began out of a campaign with the Minneapolis Area Synod, Lutheran Social Services, and Redeemer Center for Life to have a stronger Lutheran presence in North Minneapolis. And almost as soon as the center began, the pandemic began as we started in March. And so that's really influenced our development. And so, again, we're so excited for this opportunity to work with you around the Individual Development Inventory. And then the other major event that impacted our development and our world and our lives was the murder of George Floyd. And so looking at that and how that is kind of to step back and rethink how are we as faithful people connecting with the whole of God's creation and God's world. And so that's a core part of the individual development inventory. And it's designed to be a group resource. So it's not just how we see ourselves individually, but how we impact the world, the church, and our community as in our groups, collectively, if you will. So as we move into this evening, one of the reasons, again, that we're excited to be in partnership around the IDI with St. Andrew is that the opportunity to work with a congregation like St. Andrew and the amazing leadership that you're demonstrating and what that means for this community, our church, our synod, and now not just nationally, but globally, the way that in the midst of this pandemic, you are faithful leaders impacting God's world in the ways that you are developing and supporting leadership, both regionally, nationally, and globally. And the opportunity for us to partner with you in the IDI and how that also helps to facilitate how you will continue to grow and engage people. So one of the things I remember when I did the IDI, and I thought that I was pretty hot stuff. And so when I got the IDI, and it gave me feedback about how I aspired to see myself as a leader around cultural and inclusivity. And the feedback that I got was the development that it showed was it gave me a measurement of how I perceive myself and aspire myself to be, but how the world actually experiences me. So that feedback is really helpful, and it gave an idea, okay, well, what am I going to do to bridge that gap between how I aspire to see myself and to be and how the world actually experiences me. And I invite you as we go deeper in this and as we go forward, that's one of the wonderful outcomes of the IDI is who we aspire to be as a church, as faithful leaders. But also, how does the world actually experience us? So as we go forward, we look forward to this time together, and thank you again for the opportunity to partner with you with the IDI.
Thanks, Pastor Kelly. Well, the last time I was here talking to Pastor Peter and Pastor Gail, you asked me, what is culture? And I gave an answer at that time, and it wasn't wrong, but I wanted to just dive in a little bit more and start our way tonight this way. So culture is divided into two categories. One is objective, and objective culture here is above the top of the waterline of an iceberg. So it's the 10% of the iceberg that you see above the water. And in a cultural perspective, this is what you see in culture. So like you might see the color of our skin or the color of our hair or whether we're male or female. I wrote down a few things that I see when I think about St. Andrew, just to apply it to the culture here. Like I see you use YouTube as a way of communicating with people outside of this building during COVID. And people text in questions so that it can be interactive that way. Other places might use Facebook Live or is it called FaceTime? And Zoom, these are other mediums that people can use. But here, you use YouTube. Also, emails here. Whenever I get an email from St. Andrew, there's differences in the font type and the font size and the colors, and everything is drawing my attention to what's most important. Sometimes the titles, and then it provides more information later that I can easily follow and get even more information after that. A lot is communicated in a little bit of space. And it's not really like the emails I send to, Dan or whatever, right? Like to my friends, my emails don't look like that. So it's something specific and special and unique to St. Andrew. Also this building space, you'll see a lot of neutral colors, and the altar is very clean behind me. It has clean lines on it, it's uncluttered, and all of this has an aesthetic way of presenting St. Andrew and provides people with a sense of objective culture. Now, 90% of the iceberg is below the waterline, so 90% is subjective, Or what kind of meaning and values do these things that I've talked about express to you? How do you feel about them? And how is that different from other kinds of cultures when you walk into other places? So I thought more about subjective culture, and I thought about things like your lead pastor. You call him Pastor Lilliard, right? And that's, what might that mean if between two people, if someone addresses Pastor Lilliard as Pastor Lilliard instead of David Lilliard or Pastor David, or however they decide to just maybe pastor, maybe they do that too. But what kind of meaning does that relate? What kind of associations are there? Is there formality? Is there a respect? There's something in there in that way that we exchange that name on a regular basis that reflects something. Now compare that to me and my new church, Christ the River of Life. We're still figuring out what our culture is because we're just getting together and not even in person, right? Most of the time virtually. And so some people might call me Pastor Kim, and others might call me Pastor Deanna Kim, or Pastor Deanna, or Pastor Bassett. And right now, that's, what is associated with that in that case? It's probably something different than having a pastor for many years that you've called Pastor Lilliard. So that's a little bit of subjective. Also, another subjective difference I think about is family. In my church, at Christ the River of Life, if someone says, my son, it may or may not mean somebody that grew up in their household that was directly related to them, like someone they gave birth to or they were adopted or something like that. Here, if I was to talk about my son, you would expect me to be talking about one of my two boys that went through confirmation. So family has a more expanded sense in another culture. And that's something that's subjective. You wouldn't necessarily see that when you walk into a place. So the IDI is relevant when you feel tension or differences, notice differences in cultures. Now, I want to talk about intercultural competence, and that's the way that you effectively or not effectively, however you do it, language across cultures. I remember Steve Starks and his son and daughter did a video for A More Just World not too long ago. And Steve Starks' daughter said, recommended, advocated that people do their own work. Okay. And I thought about what she was thinking about when she said that. And I think what she was saying is she wanted people to build their own intercultural competence, that this is self-work that she wanted people to do, that this is something that you can do. So to develop intercultural competence, there's two aspects to that. One is understanding your own culture more, so developing a deeper understanding of what it's like here, or what it's like in your home, in your school, in your workplaces, all the different places that you go to and spend time in. What is culture like in your own orientation, in your own understanding? And then the other part of building intercultural competence comes from going into other cultures and developing a better understanding of other cultures. So to do this, I thought about it, because some people say, well, we're in Minnesota. We don't have lots of different cultural experiences to go to. How will we do that? And what I say is you need to pull out your big cultural magnifying glass. Maybe you even need to get out your, what is that called, microscope, and have a specimen lens, right? And start examining everything that happens in your own environment to really understand what is that saying to you objectively and subjectively. And then the same thing in other places that you go to visit. And if you ever feel conflict, like you think something, you notice a difference, you feel some kind of tension, maybe even your blood pressure rises, you can guess that there's a cultural difference in there. Oh, and I also like to say, if you don't think there's cultural differences in Minnesota, maybe I could just say Democrat and Republican, right? There's one that I think counts. The IDI focuses on developing intercultural competence, and it will also tell you on a continuum with 5 orientations where you fall. This is based on your life experiences, and I want to briefly go through that now. This is going to be very brief. You're going to have another opportunity to hear more experiences or examples of what it's like in each of these orientations, and to spend more time in each one of them when you see a video that we'll talk about a little bit later. But for right now, just to get us ready to hear our results of our group here at St. Andrew, I'm going to run through these briefly. The first one of the 5 is called denial. Denial is a monocultural mindset. And in denial, you are interested in your own culture. You have insights into only your own culture, or mostly your own culture, and very little interest in other cultures. The second one is polarization. Polarization is also a monocultural mindset. And in polarization, it's an us and them kind of thought process. Now, there's 2 types of polarization. If you think that my culture is better, and you're looking at other cultures thinking that, judging them, that they're not as good, that is called polarization defense. And then there's something called polarization reversal. Polarization reversal is when you think, gee, my culture is not so good and other cultures are better. So there's 2 ways that you can be in polarization. The third of the orientations is called minimization. Minimization is a transitional orientation into the intercultural mindset. And in minimization, you're focusing on similarities in cultures. So that's where your eyes go, that's where your mind goes, is connecting cultures through similarities. And Dan's going to talk about that more in a little bit. And then the last 2 orientations are acceptance and adaptation. Both of those are intercultural mindsets, sometimes called global mindsets. And in acceptance, you deeply comprehend cultural differences from one culture to another culture. And in adaptation, it says you're a bridge across difference. I would say you navigate cultures well, and you can adapt as you walk into a culture, feel like you're part of that. So that's a continuum in a nutshell. And with that, I want to turn it over to Dan.
Thank you so much, Deanna, Pastor Deanna Kim. My name is Dan Bielenberg, and I'm with CLNE. I am recently been approved to be a deacon within the ELCA, and in terms of, yes, thank you. Thanks, everybody. It's a wonderful thing, and it's a beautiful thing to be a part of this work that St. Andrew is engaging in around culture, intercultural competence. It's something that I care deeply about, as well as creating a more just world and being a part of what God's doing in that way. So I'm super excited to be with you all. My role in this hour presentation is to really bring the results to you, to help interpret the results that you have all created through your responses. Many of you then, we know, have taken individually the IDI assessment. What I'm going to be sharing now is the group assessment. Each of you will have a chance to have an individual debrief of what your response is and what it means for you and where to go with that and what that work might look like individually. What I'm going to do here is talk about how that rolls up and sums up into a group debrief. So what does this look like for St. Andrew as a group? And so before I jump into it, there's 2 things that are important about with any assessment or any kind of survey, a couple of kind of pre-questions. And one is, have you responded honestly to each of the statements in the IDI? And like any assessment, you know, if to the degree that you have, then this is going to make sense. But I just wanted to highlight that. And the second is to ask yourself, have you had any kind of, are you experiencing a significant personal transition in your life? My point here is when you respond to the questions in the IDI, you're responding from your experience. And that's going to shape the way the results show up for you. And so it's not that they're wrong results or anything like that, but just take that into account. If that's you, if you're going through something big and heavy this year, and I know a lot of people are, as you go through your results, just kind of reflect on how that might have shaped the way you answer these questions and how you respond to and deal with cultural differences, okay? So what I'm going to be doing is sharing a lot of data, or not a lot, but some important pieces of data from this assessment. And I want to explain, they're all really around the idea of how your group makes sense of and responds to differences. Like Deanna Kim said, culture really becomes important. Intercultural competence becomes important when we start encountering people in other cultures. And how do we do that? How do we show up? How do we want to show up? And that's what this is really going to help us understand. So real briefly, before I jump into the actual results, I'm going to be sharing with you your perceived orientation. So your perceived orientation, if you think about the continuum, the intercultural development continuum that Pastor Deanna showed, your perceived orientation is where you place yourself on that continuum. How do you see yourself in terms of how you relate and interact with culturally diverse people and groups? That's your perceived orientation. It's kind of how you think you are and how you think you want to show up to the world. Your developmental orientation is your primary orientation as assessed by the IDI. So the questions in the IDI and how we respond tells us more about how we actually are experienced by others. And so that's the difference between the perceived orientation, how we want to show up, and your developmental orientation, which is how we're experienced. The difference between those two, if there is a difference, is called your orientation gap. And so you can think of it as if I've overestimated my intercultural competence, that'll be one kind of gap. If I've underestimated my competence, that's another kind of gap. Or maybe I've got a pretty good sense for how I am, how culturally competent I am. So we'll talk about that for St. Andrew. Then because this is a group profile, we'll talk about the range. Because not all groups there's variation in the group, and we'll have a chance to look and talk about that. And then finally, where does this lead us? Where does this lead St. Andrew in terms of what comes next, where you aspire to be, and what are some ways to develop it that way? So those are just the concepts that we're going to be sharing here. So we'll start with your perceived orientation. So St. Andrew, you place yourself on this continuum in acceptance. And what that means is you see yourselves as appreciating, understanding cultural differences at a pretty deep level. If you think about what Pastor Deanna Kim was talking about, below the water level, that's how you see yourselves, as being able to understand and relate to differences and commonalities and patterns around culture. Your perceived orientation. Now let's look at your developmental orientation, your DO. So according to the IDI, St. Andrew is placed within minimization on the continuum. And what that means is, as a group, you tend to emphasize what's common, the commonalities, the common ground that people might have when you're dealing with differences in culture. And that can do some things. It's good. It's a way to survive. It's a way to do well. But it can also mask important cultural differences in values, perceptions, and behaviors. You're really just not attending to those things that are below the waterline. So we've looked at your perceived orientation and your developmental orientation. And I mentioned there would be a gap. There might be a gap, and here it is. So this is St. Andrew's gap between your perception, how you want to show up in intercultural situations, and how it looks like you are being experienced. There is a gap. It's not a small gap, but it is there. And this is usually in the reports, in a group setting, or particularly in individuals where people are surprised. They're kind of taken aback by the fact that the way they want to be showing up is not the way they might actually be experienced. So let's take a minute for that to sink in. And whatever reaction you have, that's fine. It's normal. I've had my own reactions when I've gone through this, as I think everybody has. The thing to note is that this is not unusual. To have a gap like this where you've overestimated your intercultural competence is not unusual at all. And so just take that into account and know that this is really all about development. And so we're going to talk about where this can lead us. So St. Andrew assesses at minimization. That's as a group where St. Andrew is from a intercultural competency standpoint. And I know these words are very small on the slide, so I'm going to refer to this to help you understand it, but hopefully you can see them pretty well on the video as well. You'll have a chance to look at these and talk about these when you do your individual debrief as well. So like I said, and like we've heard, minimization is the orientation that's in the middle. It's this transitional time between the monocultural mindset and the intercultural mindset. And the truth is, minimization is a very big span. As an orientation, it's twice as big as the others. And frankly, almost 2/3 of people who take the IDI are located in minimization. So we can feel like we're part of a large group when we're dealing with minimization. But what it means is that you have a tendency to focus on what's common, on commonalities. When you're dealing with diversity, you're going to see and look for what's the same about us. Not so much what's different and how it might affect what I do. You're going to be focused on what's the same, and you're going to build on that. Common ground, right? What that can also mean, though, is that we're masking differences that are important and could be important when we're making decisions together. Now, this picture kind of shows 7 key characteristics of minimization. Before I launch into them, I want to make one really important point, is that minimization can look differently depending on whether you're part of the dominant culture or whether you're part of the non-dominant culture. For the dominant culture, this is the water we swim in, and so this is likely to be the way we experience cultural differences, and we'll talk about that. But often minimization, if you're in the non-dominant culture, minimization can be your strategy for coping, for dealing with the culture that you're in, with this dominant culture that's different than yours. Think of it as sort of you're good at figuring out what the rules are, what the expectations are, and adjusting to them. You might be leaving some of yourself out of interactions because that's not what the dominant culture wants from you. And just so you know, that's one way that minimization can show up. So let's talk about some of these others. And if I were sitting across a table with you or we were in a room together, I might make this more interactive and ask you where you've seen these things in your own life or in the life of St. Andrew. Instead, because we're doing this over a video, I'm just going to ask you I'm going to pause and ask you to think about these things. Where have you seen these come to life? Where have you seen these to be true for yourselves or for St. Andrew? And we'll start at the top here. When you're in minimization, you do not view differences as a threat to your own cultural practices. You know there are differences. You recognize that there are differences, but you're not threatened by them. Okay? You seek to avoid stereotyping and biased behavior by treating each person as an individual. The thing about these characteristics is that they're very appealing to me too. You want to treat people as individuals, right? You don't want to stereotype. What's missing in the middle, if you can think about stereotypes as overgeneralizing about people and their cultures, and you can think about individuals as people, individuals who they are, there's a middle layer of culture that we've left out. And we're not attending to that, and we're not going to really be able to experience that person. They're not going to experience us as being mindful of their culture. We might be interested in differences, in cultural differences. We might be students of cultural differences and be super curious, but we don't know what to make of it, and maybe we might be focusing our interest in those things above the waterline, those more objective cultural differences, rather than being curious and seeking out to understand those things below the waterline, the values, the beliefs, the expectations. These are all the things, if we're really curious about and we have experiences with other cultures, we're going to get to know better. If we're in minimization, we recognize the essential humanity of every person, and we try to act in tolerant ways. Again, this is all very beautiful language, and in a way it sounds very Christian. I think of the golden rule, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. And if you think about that, that actually is a minimizing kind of a belief, because you're basically saying how I want to be treated is how you would want to be treated. That isn't always the case. And so the IDI actually talks about a thing called the platinum rule, which says, do unto others as they would like to be done unto, which means I've got to understand what others desire. How do others see us? We may not be fully aware of how one's ideas and behaviors are culturally grounded. How much do we know about our own culture and how it informs how we show up? There's an opportunity for a lot of blind spots here unless we do work on our own to understand our own culture. And then lastly, in minimization, we tend to assume that people from other cultures are basically like us, because that's kind of what we're looking for. We see others and we tend to find, oh, they've got families, I've got families. They're raising children, I'm raising children. And we see those things, those common values, and that's what we look for. And we miss the things that are different. We miss particularly the deep beliefs and values and expectations that are important, more important for us to look for. So that's minimization. And I would really ask you to reflect on where you've seen these things in your life, in the culture here at St. Andrew. Now, the thing about any of these orientations is that they have strengths and they have developmental opportunities. Wherever you are in this continuum, it's got a strength. No matter whether you're in denial and monoculture, there's a strength there. The strength for minimization is that you have probably found some success when you're finding those common grounds. You're finding that commonality. And you can do a lot when you're finding commonality and you're building common ground. The developmental opportunity is really, though, to really start to recognize and appreciate differences. And there's really two directions to this, two dimensions, which kind of go along with what Pastor Deanna Kim was talking about. Work on self, becoming more self-aware of your own culture. Where does that come from? And understanding for yourself what's going on below the waterline in terms of values, beliefs, expectations. Where do those things come from? And then maybe how do they show up for other people? A good example that I think of is my time orientation. Just through my life and my work in the corporate world, time becomes a very important thing for me. To be on time is super important. And I can convey that to other people. Even if I'm relaxed about it, they're going to know my foot taps, or I disapprove of somebody who's late. That's a norm that I have, a cultural norm that I have, that if I'm not careful, I can lay that on other people. And that's how they'll experience me. That's an example of how self-awareness can help. The other is being more curious and studious about differences, cultural differences in others that we've talked about. So really doing some work to understand what are the differences in the people that I'm working with, and not just at the objective level, but at the subjective level as well. That's what the work looks like. And there'll be a lot of opportunities for you as individuals and groups to work on this. Now, this is a group debrief, which means that it's made up of lots of individual assessments. And so while as a group, you're being placed in minimization, that's not true for everybody. If we look at this distribution, you can see that, yeah, there's 70% of you all are in minimization, but there's some that are in acceptance, and there's some that are in polarization and denial. So when you look at this, you can recognize this is not, there's a fairly significant range here. And you might say, well, what does it mean? What are the implications of this range? Well, what a wide range reflects is really a lack of consensus about, in terms of intercultural competence, it's a lack of consensus about how to make sense of cultural differences and how to adapt to them. So you're going to have, essentially you've got in one group, you've got both the monocultural mindset and you've got the intercultural mindset. And so it's really hard without doing some work together, it's hard to have a shared vision for how to deal with intercultural encounters, or certainly work that has to do and involves working with other cultures. So there's a lot of work to be done, I think, in terms of together working on being intentional about developing intercultural competence. And that'll allow you to have more of a shared vision. And so where does this lead us? The last graph that I'll show you is called the leading orientation. And this is where you're headed. This is where, it really expresses where you want to be and where you see yourselves going. And I want to be encouraging about this because wanting to be there, wanting to go there is an important thing. And so as you do your work, you're already positioned well to be learning more about differences, learning more about yourself, and you're going to become more accepting of other cultures and more adaptive. Okay, and so now I'm going to pass it over to Kelly, who can talk about how we're going to do this work and what comes next.
Oh, there we go. Thanks. Thanks, Dan. All right, so hi, I'm Kelly Schumacher-Fuller. You've probably all received at least one email from me in the last couple of weeks as we got you set up for the inventory. I am the other Kelly at CLNE, the non-pastor of the Kellys, and I'm happy to be with you all and sharing in this work. I'm going to talk a little bit about what's next and then open it up for questions, so I think you can start texting those questions in if you want to now. And I just want to take a second though, before I do that, to say thank you to all of you for really hearing this invitation to take the IDI and saying yes, for your curiosity around that and your openness. I want to say thank you to your pastoral staff for really bringing energy to that work. That's a big deal. It's no small thing to show up, and so thank you. I hope that after you heard Dan's part of the presentation, that you're still feeling that curiosity and openness. It may have stirred up some reactions for you. Maybe you're like Pastor Kelly and you thought you were kind of hot stuff about intercultural competency, and you looked at the range and you saw that nobody was assessing an adaptation and you're feeling some kind of way about that. Maybe you saw that range and you're just really wondering, where did I assess? Like, how did the IDI place me in my questions? Maybe you are looking at all those examples that Dan put up about how minimization shows up, and you're thinking about, oh, I see where that might be happening at St. Andrew, or I see where I might be doing that. Whatever that reaction or response is, I hope that it's mostly out of curiosity and openness to continue. And there's two ways that Dan's touched on, that we've all kind of touched on, how the work is going to continue. So there's the individual portion, and then there's the group portion. So the individual portion is these individual debriefs that we keep alluding to, which is where you'll go through how the IDI assessed you when you took the inventory. Pastor Gill's going to talk a little bit more about the technicalities, I think, of how you're going to sign up for that, but let me just go through the short list of how that works. The first is that we have 6 incredible, and I'm completely biased, but I think they're incredible, and I think you will too, 6 qualified administrators, or QAs, which is a fancy word for people that know how to use the IDI. We have 6 of us. It's the 4 of us that are here tonight, as well as 2 of our colleagues, Richard Webb and Lana Field. And we all have times available for you all in the next month or so to get your individual debriefs. So you're going to sign up for a 45-minute slot to do that with us. And before you do that, we are asking you to watch a practical applications of the Intercultural Development Inventory video. It's a 26-minute video, I think, that Deanna Kim sort of alluded to, that goes through each of the stages and each of the development orientations, and will really ground that time with your QA. So we ask you to watch that closer to the time when you do your debrief, and bring your reflections and your reactions to that into your time together. So you're going to receive a link for that. You're also 24 hours before your time with your QA, you're going to get 2 documents in your email. They're PDFs and they'll come in the same email. And one is your individual report, and the other one is your individual development plan. And you can take a look at those before your time with your QA, or you can wait and be surprised by them when you show up, whichever you prefer. So then you're going to have, with all of that information, you're going to have a 45-minute confidential session with the QA of your choosing at the time and date of your choosing. And in that time, we're going to go through your reflections and reactions to that video, your individual report, your individual development plan, and any other questions, responses, things that it stirred up for you, and explore what the work can continue to be for you, like what you want that to look like, some options for what that can look like. And then in terms of the group stuff, Pastor Peter and Pastor Gail, I know, have already been scheming. They have some imagination around how you all as a group here at St. Andrew can continue to utilize this tool as you move forward. We know that the holiday season is coming, and so really thinking about this next few months as focus on yourself and your self-work with those individual debriefs and seeing how the cultures are showing up. If you've got your microscope or your specimen lens, whatever Deanna Kim was alluding to, bringing that out, especially as we move through this season. And then in 2021, you all will be privy to other ways that St. Andrew is going to intentionally use the tool as a group. So that's the now what. And for tonight, the next part is to open it up if there are any questions. Okay, and I don't claim that I'm going to have all of the answers to all of the questions, so I'm going to rely on my colleagues to help me out here too.
That's fine. We'll start with a couple of them, and then we'll also open it up to others as well. The first one, the two-parter. First, how many people are in the sample, and how many took the IDI?
Yeah, you had 80 people that said yes to taking it, and I think everyone completed it. Everyone, maybe one person didn't, but so it's about 80 people from St. Andrew.
Okay, so the other part is, do people take the IDI multiple times to see progress? I wonder if I would score differently today versus before George Floyd, when I started to really focus on cultural diversity.
It's a wonderful question. The IDI can be used in lots of ways, and one of them is as a progress indicator. It generally takes, they say, about 30 to 60 hours of intentional intercultural work to move through development orientations. But yes, so one of my intercultural coaches would say that taking it every 6 to 9 months to reassess is a good time period, but 2 weeks, even if I'm really focused, probably not going to move me along the spectrum very much. Additionally, like Dan touched on, if you're going through something traumatic, if you've got a big life event going on, if you maybe were in a strange mindset when you took the IDI can only assess you at the time you take it, and that may influence your results. It may also draw you backward. Maybe something traumatic culturally happened, and you may move backward in the continuum. So, but yes.
Yeah, we have a couple more here.
Yeah.
We live in a self-segregating suburb. How do we, as a predominant white congregation, be more open to other cultures and have opportunities to grow?
It's a great question. I'm going to look at my colleagues for some additional answers. I think Pastor Kelly might have a good answer.
Hey, that is a
stand up.
wonderful opportunity to partner with CLNE, and that we are also focused on relationship building, the IDI, and also asset-based community development, but also looking at programming and partnering. Also, how you engage church anew may be another avenue. So really seeing those on your plan and a spectrum of growth, and how might those opportunities work toward your movement along the continuum.
I do think, so I grew up in Chaska, which is not so far from Eden Prairie, and I know that Eden Prairie, especially if someone's talking about Eden Prairie is a changing community. There's been a lot of cultural change. It's not just an all-white community anymore, and so how do you show up in your neighborhood? It's also important to think about what is St. Andrew communicating to the neighborhood? That doesn't mean that you're going to have a whole bunch of Somali Muslims joining St. Andrew, but what does it mean to be interacting? What does it mean to be of your community and not just in your community. So paying attention.
Yeah. And some of our colleagues might have another answer, but I think the IDI, this is a wonderful opportunity to maybe look at how we worship and how might worship actually connect with how we engage in the community. So that worship isn't in isolation, but when we say that everybody is welcome and everyone belongs, that's on Sunday morning, but how might we also connect that with how we practice in our workplace and in the school and where we play? So those taking the connection of how we celebrate being the people of God and how do we practice that out in those places of community and how we move along that continuum by connecting our worship, our identity inside of our congregation out in the world where we live our daily lives.
Okay, here's another one. Are there other local congregations that are doing the same process?
Absolutely. I don't know if you want me to go into details about who's doing the process, but absolutely. I know that Deanna Kim has worked with a number of congregations. We're working with a number of congregations. Yes, there's a lot of energy. I think that St. Andrew isn't the only faith community that was really impacted by the murder of George Floyd. I think a lot of us were. And there's a lot more energy about how do we show up in the world? How do we do this better? Maybe we haven't been doing this as well as we could be. And I just applaud that curiosity and that energy.
Maybe Pastor Peter, this is for us to answer, but there's another question. Does St. Andrew have plans to engage with other cultures in Eden Prairie?
Sure. I can certainly say, as a congregation, as we engage in this process, even before this process, but as we're engaging in this process, that it is our dedication as a congregation to be open, to listen, to engage, and to wonder, and to act in practice how a congregation can move from the way we perceive ourselves to be into something to a place where we want to become, and realize that there is a little bit of humility in that we have to take a moment to take a step back, do some of that self-assessment. Maybe as has already been shared by our presenters here, we may not necessarily like what we perceive ourselves to be versus how we are actually placing ourselves, but that is an impetus to grow and understand what steps we might be taking. So that is, in fact, what we at St. Andrew are looking forward to discovering together here. We have talked at St. Andrew too about how this process for us maybe can't be 100 miles an hour because it's hard to maintain a 100-mile-an-hour process, but a 30 or 40 or 50-mile-an-hour steady engagement and thinking and learning, community time. Pastor Gail will talk a little bit about what we have planned in January as we wrap up our session, as we continue to gather with our council, with our staff, and with the congregation, along with our friends here from CLNE as well, to engage in these things. There are some things that we're working on already, but we're engaging this process intentionally and purposefully.
Do we have any other questions from those here?
It's a massive crowd, so just kidding. Pastor Kelly, why don't you stand up?
It's a wonderful opportunity for St. Andrew. You're doing so many wonderful things now, but you may not be integrating those into intercultural. They may be at another location in the continuum, but the opportunity for, like, let's say Church Anew, to not be a satellite, but how might that integrate into the real life of your congregation and your leadership? The opportunity, there's tremendous diversity in the schools in Eden Prairie. How might that not be a satellite, but more integrated into the life of the congregation? And so the gift of the individual development inventory is to actually look at where there might be a gap and come up with specific planning on how to bridge that gap so that a more meaningful way for the congregation to engage in the diversity that's already there. But we may not be seeing it because, as Pastor Deanna said, we may think, well, there's not diversity in Eden Prairie, there's not diversity in Minnesota, but it very much is there, but because of where we are on the spectrum, we may not be seeing it and engaging it. But the great gift about the IDI, it's a commitment to make specific planning about how we're going to bridge that gap.
Okay.
Another question that I wonder is, you are in the process of evaluating several mini congregations over not just the past few months, but even longer. As you saw St. Andrew's general profile, was there anything that surprised you or not about what you saw in the St. Andrew profile?
I feel like Deanna Kim has an answer to this. My answer would be, it didn't really surprise me, but.
Yes, I would agree. Knowing about the Intercultural Development Inventory before I came here and did this group work with all of you, and thinking and reflecting on my experiences while I was here at St. Andrew, I felt like it was exactly where it felt, that people here think and have a deep appreciation for other cultures, but when you talk to somebody, you're looking for what are they saying that connects with you, right? You're looking for how does this bring us together? So by not thinking about what is different about what this person is saying, what cultural ways might they be expressing something that's of difference, you are missing part of what's being communicated, whether that's nonverbal or even verbal. Even I've seen verbal conversations where someone will say, well, that's not my experience. And so I remember this one time somebody was talking about someone saying, oh, this person is a great people person, and we really like this person, blah, blah, blah. And lots of people were talking about these great attributes. And one person came in and said, well, that's not really my experience. And they said, oh, yeah, but that person is a people person. And that was kind of the conclusion of the whole group, right? Even though this one person said something different. And that's just how our minds work sometimes, and making connections and trying to stay together as a congregation. So yeah, that was like one example. I think of a lot of other ones, but I feel like this is where St. Andrew, that this was really reflective of St. Andrew and how I know it. And it's a really beautiful place. I love St. Andrew. So I don't want you to think because your perceived orientation is an acceptance, and your developmental orientation is in minimization, that's a bad thing, because it's not at all. And in fact, what I would say is having this perspective of, oh, I'm so interested in other cultures and I want to know more about them, and I think that I'm understanding differences, like having that means that you have a vision for where you want to move next, for how you really want to be. And by taking intentional steps to work your plans, which is what we're going to talk about in the individual debriefs, you can move very quickly sometimes the first few steps towards where you envision yourself, because that's where your mind is pulling you. So you'll be able to catch up with that and do a little catch up quickly. And then after that, it might slow down a little bit. But Kelly was saying, Kelly SF, what did you say, how many, 6 to 9 months or so before you see a change in orientation? I think that's right. I think for a lot of people, it's even a year. And I just want to set this up in true reality. This means that you're going to try to work on this intentionally daily, just like you would go to the gym daily. And week after week, you want to have that same intentionality for, 3, 6, 9, 12 months before you'll see like a shift in, especially a group, from one orientation to another. So that's what you can expect in your journey ahead. And it's going to be incredible. It's going to be an incredible journey that you journey on, that you walk on, the path that you walk on. I promise you will find many divine, very sacred moments on your path. It's just incredible. The bigger I feel the differences between two cultures, the more little steps towards coming together and bridging that just feel like huge accomplishments, and it just is, really transformational. It's incredible stuff.
Amen. I think that too, if I think about churches, I can think of so much language we use that is in minimization, right? We're brothers and sisters in Christ. Amen. And that talks about our commonality, right? So it's not surprising to me in any way. Over 60% of people assess in minimization. It makes sense that, that it's not surprising. I think you're in a perfect place.
Another question about our sample as well here
Yeah.
at St. Andrew. How representative may we assume our 80 participants are of our entire congregation? And can we make any assumptions based on our self-selection to participate in the IDI?
I think that's a great question, and I think that the second question gives away the answer to the first in a lot of cases. I think a lot of your sample was self-selected. I'm not personally as knowledgeable about your congregation and who all the individuals are, so I don't know that I can properly assess that. And knowing that your sample was self-selected, it may not be fully representative of your congregation as a whole.
Okay, would we like to wrap it up?
Yeah.
And before I kind of give them a foretaste of what's coming in January. Thank you very much, Kelly.
Oh, thank you, Pastor Gail.
Pastor Kelly, did you have any
Well,
final words?
I-
Would you like to
I-
come up here? I'm going to make you stand up and
In
walk.
my own imagination, I feel pretty generous about St. Andrew because of the spectrum of how you function as a congregation, having a church anew, engaging leaders who are national and global. And that takes a larger picture about not just your aspiration, but that you're actually having stake in the ground. And so I think your commitment, your vision to leadership that is beyond just your location, to me is an indicator of being somehow on that continuum of vision and commitment to a larger picture of the church than I would think is necessarily common. And so that's one of the places that I wouldn't necessarily know how to nail where you are as a congregation and your leadership, because I'm impressed with how you are engaging the world. So, thank you.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have too much more to add. I think just to say thank you to Pastor Peter and Pastor Gail for inviting me in to talk about the IDI. It's a very strong passion of mine personally. It's something that I've been doing for a few years, and it's been a focus of my career in different times. So it's something that I feel very strongly about, and I'm just so happy to be from St. Andrew and on you with this in this adventure.
Well, we want to take this moment to just thank all of you for being here and sharing some information as we take another step in our A More Just World process. We are in that process still of doing a lot of learning, but we will want to be moving into a little more engagement in the months ahead. So the process that we're going to follow now at this point will be that in the next few days, anyone who took the assessment will be receiving an email. And in that email, you'll get a link to the conversation we had with Pastor Deanna back in October. You will also get a link if anyone wants to watch this video or this presentation again. So you'll get a second link there. And then third, you'll get a link to Sign Up Genius, where you will be able to sign up to get your own conversation on your own assessment with one of these four fabulous people or two others from CLNE. And so that is going to be the individual learning process, and then we'll have some more opportunity to be able to take a look at St. Andrew and think more about where we're going, what we want to do next. We will have some activities, some engagements, some more learning that will happen after the first of the year. Pastor Peter and I are looking at some groups, thinking that we will bring people together in some form of groups to be able to begin to explore a little bit more about where we're going to go from here. You can probably also assume that we're going to find ways to get into other communities, more diverse communities as a congregation, and work there too. So again, thank you to everyone who's been a part of this tonight. Thank you for the participants who took the IDI, and we can all look forward to a lot more learning and growing together as we become more informed about our own cultural competence. So thank you very much. Have a great evening. Good night.